What makes a mother, someone meant to protect, to love, to nurture, turn against her own family in the most unthinkable way? A home, warm and filled with laughter, where birthdays were celebrated, where bedtime stories were whispered in hushed tones, where love was supposed to be unwavering. A husband devoted to his wife. Children who looked up to their mother, trusting her completely. To the outside world, everything seemed normal. A picture-perfect family. But behind the closed doors of that house, beneath the smiles and the carefully crafted moments of happiness, something else was happening. Something no one saw coming. It started with the little things. A sudden shift in behavior. A moment of hesitation before answering a question. A glance held for just a second too long. The kind of things that wouldn't raise alarm on their own, the kind of things that could be brushed off as stress, exhaustion, or just an off day. But they weren't. They were signs. Small cracks forming in what seemed like an unbreakable bond. And those cracks, as tiny as they were, would grow into something much worse. One by one, they began falling ill. It wasn't dramatic at first. A headache here, a stomachache there. Just the kind of everyday ailments that happen in any family. But then it got worse. Unexplained fatigue. Pain that wouldn't go away. Trips to the doctor that led to confusion. No clear answers. No diagnosis that made sense. Until one by one, they stopped getting back up. It was only after the last breath was taken, after the grieving had begun, after the funeral flowers had withered, that the truth started slipping through the cracks. And when it did, the horror of it all became unbearable. Because the one person they trusted most, the one person who was supposed to keep them safe, had been the reason they were gone. She had made the choice. And once that choice was made, there was no turning back. What was she hiding? Why did she do it? And how did she think she would get away with it? The truth, as it unraveled, was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. And it all started with a secret, one she was willing to kill for. Stay with us as we take you through the disturbing case of a mother who poisoned her entire family to hide a secret so dark, it would shake an entire community to its core. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And now, let's get into it. The story begins in a quiet neighborhood where life seemed simple, where families waved to each other from their front yards, where children rode their bikes on the sidewalks, and where nobody ever imagined that real evil could live right next door. The Millers were one of those families, the kind people admired. A hard-working father. A loving mother. 2 beautiful children. They went to church on Sundays. They hosted backyard barbecues in the summer. They took family pictures every Christmas. On the surface, they were just like everyone else. But underneath it all, there was something no one could see. Laura Miller wasn't just a mother. She was a wife. A woman with responsibilities, a woman who played her part well, who knew how to keep up appearances. But appearances could only last for so long. There was another side to her life, one that had nothing to do with PTA meetings, nothing to do with school lunches or family game nights. It was a life built on secrets, a life that led her into the arms of a man who didn't belong in the world she had created. A man feared by many. A man known for things people whispered about but never dared to say out loud. Carlos, the Viper, Rodriguez. Their affair wasn't a fleeting mistake. It wasn't something she regretted. It was something she wanted, something she was willing to risk everything for. And once that line had been crossed, there was no going back. At first, she thought she could control it. That she could keep both lives separate. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And when her husband started noticing the late-night phone calls, the sudden disappearances, the way her mind seemed to be somewhere else, questions started to form. Questions that had no easy answers. For Laura, there was only one way out. Only one way to erase the problem before it erased her. If John found out the truth, everything would come crashing down. And Carlos didn't take betrayal lightly. If word got out that she had been careless, that she had let someone in on their secret, she knew exactly what would happen. He had warned her before. Loose ends had to be taken care of. And John Miller was a loose end. But John wasn't the only problem. There were the children. 2 innocent lives caught in something they didn't even understand. 2 children who had no idea that the woman tucking them into bed at night was already planning how they would never wake up again. It wasn't about hate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. And Laura Miller was willing to do whatever it took to survive. The plan had to be perfect. No blood. No violence. Nothing that would raise suspicion. It had to be slow. Untraceable. Something that would make it look like fate, like bad luck, like a sickness no doctor could explain. And so, she started small. A little at a time. A few drops in a cup of tea. A little powder mixed into dinner. Just enough to make them weak. Just enough to make it look natural. And when the sickness set in, when John started growing tired, when the children began complaining about stomach pains, she played her role well. She worried. She cared. She held their hands when they trembled from fever. She sat by their bedside as they fought for their lives. And all the while, she knew exactly what was happening. Neighbors saw her crying. Friends brought food, offered prayers, held her in their arms as she sobbed over the tragedy of it all. They called her strong. A devoted wife. A grieving mother. No one ever imagined that the real cause of all that suffering was standing right in front of them, hiding behind tears that weren't real. But secrets have a way of finding their way out. Lies start to crumble under their own weight. And as the days passed, as the funerals were planned, as the flowers began to wilt on the graves of the people she was supposed to love, the first cracks in her story began to show. A detail that didn't add up. A whisper in the wrong ear. A past that couldn't stay buried. And before long, the truth, the real truth, was starting to come out. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case like this. The next part of this story will show how the lies began to unravel, how the investigation took a turn that no one expected, and how a woman who thought she had gotten away with murder found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. John Miller was the kind of man people looked up to. A devoted husband, a loving father, a man who worked hard and never complained. He had spent years building the life he always dreamed of, a steady job, a home filled with love, 2 children who meant everything to him. He wasn't flashy, never the loudest in the room, but he was respected. He had a quiet strength about him, the kind that made people feel safe. To the world, he had it all. A wife he trusted. A family he would do anything for. But trust can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Emily Miller was 16, smart, driven, the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. She was top of her class, captain of the school's track team, already looking at colleges. People said she had a bright future ahead of her, but she never got to see it. She was close to her father, always confiding in him, telling him everything. Except she had started to notice things that didn't make sense. Her mother's sudden absences, the way she whispered into her phone when she thought no one was listening. Emily wasn't the kind of person to ignore her instincts. She had questions, but she never got the answers. Michael Miller was just 10 years old. Full of energy, always asking questions, always running ahead. He had a way of making people laugh, a way of lighting up a room without even trying. He was still young enough to believe his mother was the most wonderful person in the world. He never suspected that the meals she placed in front of him, the hands that tucked him in at night, were the very things that would take his life away. He trusted her. He had no reason not to. And then there was Laura Miller. The perfect wife. The perfect mother. The woman everyone believed had the perfect life. She had spent years making sure the world saw exactly what she wanted them to see. A woman devoted to her family. A woman who gave everything to her children. But beneath the surface, she was someone else entirely. Someone who could lie without blinking. Someone who could smile in the face of the people she was poisoning. Someone who had spent so much time pretending that she started to believe her own lies. She was careful. She was calculated. She made sure not to leave a trace. But no crime is perfect. No matter how much planning goes into it, there's always something. And in Laura's case, it was the way she played her role just a little too well. The way she grieved just a little too perfectly. The way her tears seemed rehearsed, like she had been practicing them in the mirror. People started to notice. Friends. Neighbors. And most importantly, the police. That's where Detective Sarah Thompson came in. A seasoned investigator, known for her attention to detail, for her ability to see what others missed. She had worked on cases that shook entire communities, cases that left people questioning everything they thought they knew about human nature. But this one was different. This was a mother. A woman who should have protected her family, not destroyed them. From the moment she stepped onto the scene, Sarah knew something was off. She had seen real grief before. She knew what it looked like. And Laura Miller? Something about her just didn't feel right. There were no signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. No indication that an intruder had come in the night to take the lives of an entire family. The evidence, or lack of it, pointed to something else. Something much closer to home. And as Sarah began to dig, as she started to piece together the timeline, the patterns, the inconsistencies, it became clear, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random tragedy. This was murder. And the person responsible had been right there all along. The only question now was why. Why would a mother do this? What could possibly push someone to such an unthinkable act? And how long had the truth been hidden in plain sight? It started slowly. So slowly that no one noticed at first. A cough here, a bit of nausea there. Nothing that raised alarms. Just the usual illnesses that came and went, especially in a house with kids. First, it was John. He had been complaining about feeling off, fatigue, stomach pains, a headache that wouldn't go away. But he worked long hours, barely had time to rest. It made sense that he was run down. He thought maybe he just needed to take better care of himself. More sleep, less stress. He had no idea his own wife was the reason his body was breaking down. Then it was Emily. She started skipping practice, something she never did. She was always the first on the field, always pushing herself to be the best. But now, she was exhausted all the time. Her muscles ached, her appetite was gone. She couldn't focus in class. It wasn't like her. Her friends noticed. Her teachers noticed. But Emily brushed it off. She told them she'd be fine. She had no idea what was happening inside her body, how the poison was slowly taking hold. And then Michael. His little body wasn't as strong as the others. It hit him the hardest. He started throwing up in the middle of the night. Crying that his stomach hurt, that his head hurt. Some nights he would crawl into bed with his parents, holding on to his mother, not knowing she was the one responsible. She would stroke his hair, whisper soothing words, telling him everything would be okay, all while making sure there would be no way out for him. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever happened. People left their doors unlocked. Kids rode their bikes in the streets until the sun went down. Neighbors knew each other by name. This wasn't the kind of place where a family just died. But that's what was happening. And no one understood why. Doctors were confused. Tests showed nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe it was food poisoning, maybe a virus. Maybe something in the water. But the symptoms weren't going away. If anything, they were getting worse. More hospital visits. More prescriptions that did nothing. And through it all, Laura stayed by their side, playing the role of the worried wife and mother. She never missed a chance to hold their hands, to wipe their foreheads, to pretend she was just as lost as everyone else. But behind closed doors, she was anything but lost. She knew exactly what she was doing. She measured out the doses carefully, making sure it was slow, untraceable. She did her research. She knew how to mimic a grieving widow, how to cry on cue, how to make herself look like a victim. She had spent months planning this. Years even. And now, she was watching it all unfold exactly the way she wanted. All for him. Carlos, the Viper, Rodriguez. A name that sent chills through the city. A man no one crossed. No one except Laura. She had been tangled up with him for years, sneaking away to be with him, lying about where she was, who she was with. John never suspected a thing. He trusted her. He believed in their family. He never thought for a second that the woman he loved was capable of something like this. But Laura knew the truth. She knew that if John ever found out, if her children ever found out, she would lose everything. Carlos didn't do complications. He didn't like loose ends. And John was a loose end. Emily was a loose end. Michael, too. They weren't supposed to be part of her world. And so she made sure they wouldn't be. The neighborhood mourned as one by one, the Millers succumbed to their mysterious illnesses. Flowers piled up outside their home. People whispered about how unfair it was, how tragic. How a family so perfect could be taken away just like that. No one saw the truth. Not yet. But the truth has a way of coming out. And for Laura, it was only a matter of time. The town grieved. Candlelight vigils were held. The local news ran touching segments about the Millers, a hardworking father, a promising young daughter, a playful little boy, and a mother whose strength in the face of tragedy was almost admirable. Almost. Because not everyone believed the story. Not everyone thought it made sense. A perfectly healthy family, wiped out in a matter of weeks, and no one had answers. That didn't sit right with Detective Thompson. She had seen tragedies before. Accidents, natural causes, medical mysteries. But this? This wasn't random. This felt intentional. The hospital had ruled out a viral outbreak. There was nothing genetic that could explain why all three of them had fallen sick while Laura walked away unharmed. And then came the toxicology reports. The results that changed everything. Traces of poison. Slow acting. Hard to detect. Something that wouldn't raise alarms right away. Something that could be passed off as food poisoning or stress or exhaustion. It wasn't a virus, and it wasn't bad luck. Someone had done this to them. Someone had planned it. And the only person who hadn't been affected? The only person still standing? Laura. Detective Thompson didn't move too fast. She watched. She listened. She went back through every piece of Laura's story, every tear she shed in front of the cameras, every statement she gave to the press. The more she dug, the more cracks she found. And then, she found the biggest crack of all. Carlos, the Viper, Rodriguez. The name meant something in law enforcement. He was known for his operations, his influence, his ruthlessness. But Laura Miller? She didn't belong in his world. She was a suburban housewife, a PTA volunteer, a mother who posted holiday pictures on social media. What did she have to do with a man like Rodriguez? Thompson followed the money. Bank records. Late-night withdrawals. Unexplained expenses. Hotel bookings under fake names. Then came the surveillance footage, Laura in places she had no reason to be. Walking into bars known to be connected to Rodriguez's crew. Meeting a man in the shadows, exchanging whispers, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing. She wasn't just involved with him. She was in deep. And then, there was John. The devoted husband. The man who thought his marriage was real. The man who had no idea his wife had a second life. But maybe he had started to suspect. Maybe that's why she had to act. Maybe that's why the sickness started when it did. Laura played her role well. She knew how to cry in all the right places. She knew how to make people believe she was broken, shattered, barely holding on. But grief doesn't erase a digital footprint. And grief doesn't explain why she had purchased small, precise amounts of a rare toxin over the last several months, always from different locations, never enough to raise a red flag. But Detective Thompson connected the dots. And once she had, there was no stopping what came next. The media turned quickly. One day, Laura was the grieving widow, the tragic mother who had lost everything. The next, she was the woman whose secrets had caught up with her. Reporters dug up old photos. Neighbors came forward with whispers, stories about how Laura had been acting strangely, how John had seemed off in those final weeks. How Emily had confided in a friend that something felt wrong in the house. The picture-perfect image of the Miller family began to crack. And soon, the truth was impossible to ignore. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, true crime followers, neighbors who once greeted Laura with warm smiles, everyone wanted to witness the moment justice would be served. Laura sat at the defense table, her face carefully composed, no longer the grieving widow, no longer the heartbroken mother. Now, she was the woman who had poisoned her own family, the woman who had chosen a life in the shadows over the people who had trusted her the most. The prosecution painted the story in brutal detail. Laura Miller had poisoned her husband and children over time, ensuring their suffering was slow, ensuring suspicion wouldn't fall on her too quickly. The evidence was airtight, bank statements tracing her purchases, surveillance footage of her secret meetings with Rodriguez, the toxicology reports confirming what had been in her victim's systems. And most damning of all, the message logs. The ones where she had spoken to Rodriguez in hushed, coded words. The ones where she had asked if there would be any loose ends left. The ones where she had expressed frustration that John hadn't succumbed sooner. Laura's defense tried to shift the blame. They painted her as a woman trapped, manipulated by a dangerous man, forced to act out of fear. They claimed she had been under Rodriguez's control, that she hadn't been thinking clearly, that she was as much a victim as the family she had lost. But the jury didn't see it that way. The prosecution countered with Laura's own actions after the deaths, her carefully planned interviews, her subtle changes in testimony, her financial moves that suggested she had always been looking ahead to a life without John, Emily, and Michael. This wasn't a woman acting under duress. This was a woman making cold, calculated decisions. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Multiple counts of first-degree murder. Premeditated. No mercy. When the judge handed down the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, the courtroom remained silent for just a moment, a heavy pause before the weight of it all settled in. Then, murmurs. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads, whispering about how a mother could do such a thing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Victims' relatives gave statements, some expressing relief, others saying no punishment would ever be enough. The case had gripped the nation, sparking debates about the nature of evil, about betrayal, about whether Laura had been truly in control or just another pawn in Rodriguez's game. Rodriguez, of course, had disappeared long before the trial began. His influence stretched far beyond the city, and the whispers said he was untouchable. But Laura? She had nowhere to run. And now, for the rest of her life, she would sit in a prison cell, surrounded by walls that would never let her forget the family she destroyed. Betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. It doesn't just steal lives, it shatters everything in its path, leaving behind only questions that may never have real answers. A husband who trusted the woman he built a life with. Children who never got the chance to understand why the mother who once held their hands, kissed their foreheads, and whispered bedtime stories was the same one who ensured they would never wake up again. A community that now looks over its shoulder, wondering if the people they share their lives with are really who they seem to be. Laura Miller's story isn't just about crime. It's about deception. About choices that start small, tiny cracks in the foundation of a seemingly perfect life, until those cracks grow too wide to hold anything together. What drives someone to poison the people who depend on them? Was it greed? Fear? A desperate attempt to rewrite a life that no longer felt like her own? Or was it something darker, something no courtroom could ever truly define? And what about the ones left behind? The relatives who now live with the weight of knowing their loved ones' last moments were spent in agony, betrayed by the one person they should have been able to trust the most. The friends who still struggled to believe that the woman they confided in, laughed with, stood beside at school events and neighborhood gatherings, was capable of such a thing. The investigators who pieced together the puzzle, uncovering truths so chilling they would never forget this case for the rest of their lives. But perhaps the most haunting question of all, the one that lingers long after the headlines fade, long after the courtroom doors close, long after the cameras stop rolling, is this: how well do we truly know the people closest to us? We share meals, homes, and secrets, believing that love and trust are enough. But are they? Would you know if the person sitting across from you at the dinner table was hiding something? Would you recognize the warning signs if they were there? Or would you, like so many others, only realize the truth when it's far too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think this case should be remembered? Do you believe justice was truly served? And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories just like this one. If you found this case as unsettling as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Every case we cover reveals something about human nature, how trust can be broken, how secrets can destroy lives, and how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. And this is just one story. There are so many more. In our next episode, we'll take a closer look at another shocking case, one that will make you question just how far someone is willing to go to escape their past. A crime so disturbing, even seasoned investigators were left shaken. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey to uncover the truth, one case at a time. Stay aware, stay safe, and always remember, sometimes, the darkest stories aren't just in books or movies. Sometimes, they happen much closer than you think.